Thank you very much. So we're talking about unfollow. We're talking about mindset. Have everybody heard this term mindset before? Yeah, probably a million times, I know. And we're talking about successes, entrepreneurship, and how to get actually out of the rat hole, so to speak. There's a beautiful thing in our brain. It's called the mind. And mindset, the term is very interesting to understand because it's two words, mind, set. And the interesting thing is you can set your own mind. So if I ask you, if you have the power of your mind under control and you want to become rich, and you just need to think about this, have a constructed idea, and then you become rich probably in the next 5 years, who would not want to take this opportunity? Okay, and who would take it? Some, but interestingly, not all. Who would believe that it's actually working? Some, okay. The interesting thing about our mind is that it's constituted from two halves, left brain, right brain. You have heard about that. And the one side says, well, yes, we can. And the other side says, probably not. And you remember this feeling when you do something that you can and cannot do, and you feel it at the same time. And that is a problematic situation. You have to overcome. There's actually a piece of material between one and the other brain part that transfers emotions back and forth. And once you begin to understand that this is happening, you can sit down and say, okay, what is this doing and what is that doing? And you will never find out because you don't feel your brain. Hopefully, because if you would, that would be bad. So you have to do it by the understanding that your brain is actually doing something marvelous. There's nothing on earth that is not based on natural evolution that was not done by an entrepreneur who had this idea and brought it to market. Nothing. So which means that our future consists of that ideas. And talking about this future, this is basically me. And this is what we discussed about experiences. So I was a very bad kid at school. I couldn't learn. I had a hard time to learn because I couldn't concentrate. Because the stuff that the teachers told me was interesting, but not for me. And so I had bad grades, but I realized at some point that maybe my brain is not really working as well as all the other kids. Maybe I'm a little bit stupid, and I had kind of a complex. But there was something that all of a sudden interests me, and that was microprocessors. That was way back in the time, and this was just so interesting that I learned the stuff within seconds. And I realized, God, thanks. My brain is actually working. So I knew I can learn. And with that understanding, I knew that if it's interesting, I learn. If it's not interesting, I don't. So what the F should I do? I focus on stuff that is interesting to me. And so I did that, started my career at an electronic company, had a marvelous opportunity. And even though I didn't have a great degree, people hired me because I knew something that was important. And I had 4 years from zero to a leather chair and big desks and everything. That was cool. And I really liked the job. But I had this idea that the distribution channels that we have, the dealers and the distributors and the resellers, they were all fighting with each other. And I said, this is so much friction, this is stupid. And I went to my boss and told him, Udo, I think we should change distribution. And I have a great idea. And he looked at me and said, wait a minute, Axel? And then he started. You want to do what? Change distribution? Imagine, distribution is a 5,000-year-old business. It's interwoven between channels of distribution and resellers and retailers and brokers and everybody. There are millions of people in this network, and you want to change this? I mean, you're a great guy, but this is never going to work. Okay, bummer. Boo. I thought I had a great idea, but he clearly described to me that this is impossible. And he said, Axel, this is impossible. And I thought, okay, will this be impossible in 10,000 years from now? He said, 10,000 years, I don't know, but it's impossible now. And I thought, well, if it's possible in 10,000 years, why not now? Somebody will make it possible. And so I made it possible by simply starting my own distributor company. Went bankrupt, almost bankrupt in 6 months. We kind of fixed things. We grew so fast that we were almost impossible to continue because we couldn't finance the growth. So we had another problem to solve. But 10 years later, it was a $5 billion company. We fought against 8,000 competitors, and we were number 3 in the world. So I learned that impossible is a very important sort of keyword for me. You know, that is my hashtag, it's impossible, because that triggers me immediately. And so after this experience, that was my first time when I sort of broke all rules, because this was impossible, but 10 years later it wasn't. We're talking about a new company, and I wanted to finance this, went out in the market. We got actually crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding, and that was in 1997, and that was impossible. And in this case, even the finance authorities came to us and said, that is impossible. So I asked them, so why is it impossible, and what is the paragraph or the law that makes it impossible? And she said, well, I have to admit, we don't have that yet, but we will have it. And so we struck a deal that we will even help them make this law happening. But the trade was, it was like, you know, the devil and another devil was trading. The trade was that I will help them if they allow us to stay in business with what we have until this law is basically in action. And she knew she hadn't another opportunity anyway. So that was cool. So I not only broke the law, but the rules, but also the law in theory, but there was no law, so I didn't break it because I learned at one point you can break any rule, but not the law. So then there was a third company. We went to San Francisco and started the company that was actually building a whole new kind of software. It was so-called software as a service. Now here we had a problem because there were 2 competitors. They had 68 million in the bank from pre-bubble fundraising, the other 72, and we had 1 million, which I was very proud of, but even that 1 million was completely overshadowed. And people said, Axel, come on, there is no chance, this is impossible. And you know, impossible, this is my hashtag, and so, okay, let's keep going. 5 years later, we were the market leader because we had 2 things. 1, a disruptive business model, and 2, we had a stellar team. And I learned much later, actually too late, I thought, that I'm probably not good at technology and finance and business and marketing and sales or anything else, but I can assemble very good teams, and I always did. So this made it happen, and I realized that for everybody who wants to start a company, keep thinking that no matter how good you are not as good as your team. Never, ever. So, with that said, people ask me when we started to basically retire, and they ask me, so when you teach your startups, because this is the typical Silicon Valley world is giving back, how do you think? I mean, how do you do or did what you did? And I always said, I have no idea. I don't know. It just popped up somehow, and I just ran my way. And after a couple questions, I realized, okay, there are a couple things that are indeed, I wouldn't say unique, but important. Skill I have, developed or not, I don't really know, honestly, is that I can wipe out everything that exists in my mind and deal with this non-existing world and take this non-existing world and build a solution basically from a clean slate. So I did not, in no case what I did, obey to, well, this is available or this. Very much like I said in the beginning, the left brain and the right brain. He said, yeah, rich is nice, probably not for me. It happens to all of us. So, but if you can erase this little devil in you and say, okay, we don't have anything, so why don't we start with that? That will work. Interestingly enough, I looked at the history and learned how Silicon Valley was started. It was a handful of people. It didn't exist before. In the 1960s, these kind of guys, Terman is one of the HP guys who founded actually the HP, Shackley, Moore, and Jobs. Wonderful. So you don't need a lot of people, there's just some to actually create things out of nothing. Now, if we look further, look into Switzerland. Alfred Escher created the railroad for Switzerland, then he ran out of money, so he created a bank, Credit Suisse. Well, the bank was not really secure enough for foreign investors, so he created a back insurance company, Zurich Rückversicherung. So then he said, okay, now I need more talent, so he created ETH. I mean, this person basically single-handedly built the economy of Switzerland, which back then was one of the poorest countries in the world. Which means to me, we can make a Switzerland in any single country in the world. And so I look back into Germany, same thing. Back in the 80s, there was no Germany. It was a fragmented country. And a handful of people basically built what's today a close to $5 trillion economy. So now it gets actually even cooler. Come on. Give me the other one. Sorry about that. It doesn't go back, or is this not related to this, right? Oh, I'm sorry. So I have to look here. So here, and this is just recently. This is South Korea. South Korea in the 1960s was one of the poorest countries in Asia. Today, it's wiped off of the emerging country because it's a developed country now. And if you look at the GDP and the export, you see something magically. Half of the GDP was done by export. And that triggered an idea in my brain saying, okay, if we see these guys in Ghana, and we heard people from Ghana, we heard people from Nigeria, we heard people from Kenya, and from Nepal and so forth, they have excellent brains. And this is just a few, and we don't need more than a few, like in any other developed country before. We don't need to feed 7 billion people. We need to make 5,000 build an economy. And so we looked at what it takes, and we realized that innovation up here, invention, is only the spark. But then you produce, and when you produce, you create jobs. And when you sell it in your ecosystem. But when and this is where the curve goes up, when you sell it across the planet, then there's prosperity in that particular country. And I learned one thing that was very striking for me. When we went to the US, I was told that the US has only one territory for sales. It's the world. Of course, the US is only selling into the world and nowhere else. But it isn't hybris. It is a sheer economic reason. If you sell your products worldwide, you make your country economically rich. And if you don't, then you don't. Without a Nestle and the Credit Suisse and the UBSs and all these companies in Switzerland, Switzerland would still be as poor as it was. Now we have a social problem that you were actually taught that you don't need to go big, small, step by step, do a little, and then prove yourself, and then it's enough. Now, for whatever reason we get taught this story, it kills our prosperity long term. I was wondering, why are so many people, for instance, in Switzerland, actually a little bit fearful that poverty could come back? Well, maybe this is the reason. Maybe it's something that we feel that there's something not really going well, like it did before. So at the end of the day, we believe that poverty is one reason that also is in the brain, but it's also in the education part. We are able to create prosperity for every nation. Because if we follow the rules, and this is follow, that the rest of the economics in our world worked. A few people in a poor country started something and made it great. If this worked multiple times in Europe, it worked multiple times in the US, it worked at least one time, if not a second time now in Asia, why shouldn't it work anywhere else? And there's one thing I urge you to forget, really unfollow. This is an old understanding that goes back about 5,000 years in time, that we cannot all be rich. There's one proof why we can, and this is actually Europe. When you look at the export per capita list about Europe, you see Europe itself is somewhere in the middle field. And only because in this list, it shows that the European export to other countries out of Europe is limited, is not so well. But the export within the country is amazing. And that means if 500 million as an ecosystem can sell to each other and thrive, why not 5 billion? So and at the end of the day, we believe that if we can unfollow our old thinking and build prosperity, even though sometimes it looks like profit and bad, and we all want to be non-profit and good, we have to leave this thinking. We have to unfollow this understanding, because we cannot continue to feed 7 billion people with that thinking. We cannot. And here's the reason. Even in the next 10 years, if we would be able, with all the NGOs in the world, to feed the 3.5 billion of the very poor people, in the next 10 years, 1.3 billion people are born. Forget that the other people die, but these 1.3 billion need to be fed as well. We cannot keep up with that. But what we can is actually go into the countries, and what we heard actually from other speakers already, there's a very interesting speech from somebody in Nigeria, that we can help them start their own economy, like we did in all the other countries. And that is an unfollow of thinking that I hope you all can help embrace this, because this is how we can literally change the world. But we have to rethink also now international development aid. It was 70 years it didn't work. We have to rethink. We have to disrupt development aid. Thank you very much.